Welcome to another session of lectures by Lob-EZ. I'm your host, Dr. Lob-EZ. Today's topic will be European exploration with the focus on the encomienda system, as well as the Atlantic slave trade. This is installment number 4 of this European exploration unit. I want to just show this map here of the global empire that is the Spanish Empire. And one of the reasons for showing that is just to get an idea of just how vast it is and the trouble that created for the Spanish king, who was Carlos, King Carlos, or as he is more widely known, Charles V, or Chucky V, as we lovingly refer to him as, the Holy Roman Emperor too. So we talked a lot about him during the Protestant Reformation, specifically with regards to Martin Luther, and we knew that he was a very busy guy dealing with all of the things taking place in Europe, but on top of that, as the King of Spain, he also was responsible for the exploration, colonization of the New World. So as a very busy man, it was difficult for him to exact like his total control over the Spanish colonies that existed in the New World, especially considering how far away they were. So it tends to make sense then that he developed a system known as the encomienda system, okay? And what that was is a set of rules for governing various land grants that were given to Spanish settlers, or what we call the conquistadors. And so what this system did was allowed the colonists, the Spanish settlers, to administer the land and use it, exploit it, so that they can make money off of it, whether that was through mining or for agriculture. And then what it also allowed them to do, it granted them permission, is to compel the Amerindians to work for them, okay? Now, it was not a system of legalized slavery, although it probably could have been. That was strictly forbidden by the Catholic Church and the Pope. What they were to do, these Spanish settlers, with the Amerindians in return, was to pay them, was to treat them humanely and justly, and look over them, and also, if desired, help them convert to Christianity, specifically Catholicism. Okay, so that was at least the plan. But in reality, with no oversight from the Spanish crown, it was difficult to enforce those expectations. And the greed of the Spanish settlers got the best of them, and it wasn't long before they abused the Amerindians terribly, brutally, okay? And so in addition to their greed, there was a view among the Europeans, the Spanish, in the way in which they viewed the Amerindians, and it was they viewed them as less than human, subhuman. And the biggest reason for that was the practice, although it wasn't as widespread as it was believed, but the practice of cannibalism led them to view the Amerindians as less than human, and therefore not deserving humane treatment. And so that at least explains some of the terrible abuses that they faced at the hands of the Spanish. This next slide here is an illustration that shows some of the abuses, and this is the topic is some type of mine, whether it's gold or silver, I'm not sure, and it doesn't matter. But what you see are the Spanish exacting some type of revenge for a believed theft of gold or silver. And so they're cutting the hands off of these Amerindians. Okay, and so this illustration obviously sort of underscores the terrible treatment that was allowed to take place, although this was according to the encomienda system, not legal or not allowed. It happened anyway. Okay. When we talk about mining, it was there that some of the most brutal treatment of the Amerindians took place, and it had terrible consequences and resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Amerindians. And the illustration here is of the Potosi mine, which is located in South America in the modern day country of Peru, up way high in the Andes Mountains. And it literally is a mountain of silver. And even though this mine had been begun by the originated with the Inca, the Spanish took it over when they defeated the Inca, and they required the Amerindians to work there, and the conditions under which they worked were some of the most brutal ever recorded. And as I said, the death toll was terribly high. Greater than 50% of the workers who worked in these mines died, perished. So, but the profits were excessive, and because of the Potosi mine, Spain becomes the wealthiest country in all of Europe, and they coin the silver, and it becomes part of their currency. And later on, they're going to send a lot of that as they purchase goods from China and other Asian countries. The man who is most responsible for speaking out vocally against the mistreatment of the encomienda system was this man, Bartholomew de las Casas, a Dominican clergy member, a Catholic clergy member, and he witnessed firsthand some of the terrible abuses, and he wrote extensively about it, and he protested to Charles V and wrote multiple letters to him in an attempt to get the encomienda system abolished, and he was successful with the passage of the new laws of the Indies, which led to greater protections of the crown for the Amerindians once they were baptized. So once they were baptized, they were considered subjects of the crown and therefore worthy of protection. Okay, and so at least on paper, this was designed to protect them from any type of harsh treatment. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Hard to measure what level of improvement this took, the new laws of the Indies. There was some considerable improvement, but to say that the abuses stopped would be naive to think so. But at any rate, something that goes along with that is the creation of the viceroy system that kind of comes out of this. And the viceroy system was something created so that there was more direct control over these territories, over these colonies by the Spanish crown. Okay, and so a viceroyalty had a figure who governed it, and he was, of course, called the viceroy. So he was more like a governor, selected, chosen by the crown to administer justice more directly. And so there was more oversight, and so this sort of lends itself to the idea that the treatment of the Amerindians did improve, at least somewhat. We do know, though, that there was an eagerness for the Amerindians to convert to Catholicism so that they would get that supposed protection from the crown. And so what's interesting when we talk about Latin America, and of course Latin America is everything in the Western Hemisphere that's south of the United States. So that's going to include Mexico, the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. Today, greater than 90% of all Latin Americans are Catholic. So the Catholic Church, with the help of the missionaries, did spread Catholicism all throughout the New World very successfully. So the next topic that we want to talk about today is going to deal with the Atlantic slave trade. And it's mentioned here, let me move this out of the way so you can see, because of the terrible mistreatment, the disease, and the warfare between the Spanish and the Amerindians, the estimate is about 90% of that population died. So prior to the arrival of the Spanish in the New World, the speculation is there was about 60 million Amerindians in the Western or in what is today Latin America. About 75% of them died due to diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza. And then maybe another 15% died from warfare and just the mistreatment that took place, especially under the encomienda system. So we're looking at a wholesale death of over 50 million, nearly 55 million died. Of course, those are estimates, but in any case, it's a very high number. So that created a challenge for the Spanish when it came to finding labor, a source of labor. And so it didn't take long before they turned to Africa. And the reason why was because the Portuguese had experimented in the Azores, which is an island chain kind of west of Portugal and kind of the northwestern coast of Africa. They experimented with sugar plantations and using African slaves to make a go of them. And so in 1518, the first boatload of slaves arrives in the Americas in the Caribbean. It's believed that the island was Hispaniola, which is, of course, the modern day country of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Okay, so 1518. So if we were to just, for some context, relate that to, this is just 1 year after Martin Luther posts his 95 Theses on the church door of Wittenberg. So a lot of these things are happening right along the same time. Okay, what this next slide shows is one of the common misconceptions, at least initially from historians, about the nature of the African slave trade. And the misconception lies with the idea that it began on the western coast with the arrival of the Europeans, the Portuguese and the Spanish, and that they were the ones that were responsible for the origins of the African slave trade, and that's just not true. So earlier, Arab traders and slave traders conducted that on the eastern half of the continent, where what we call the Horn of Africa, in this area right here near the modern day countries of Ethiopia and Somalia. And so millions of slaves were stripped from the eastern half of Africa, and they went throughout the Middle East. And so that's just a correction and to a common misconception regarding slavery. The other important kind of background piece of information is slavery has been with us, unfortunately, since the beginning of time. And really, all civilizations had evidence of some type of human slavery, although the forms varied, but there were throughout the world and throughout history a multitude of cases and incidences of the institution of slavery. But there is some belief that it was concentrated most heavily in the area of the tropics, okay, this belt here. And the reason being is believed that it's due to the climate. The heat and the humidity makes it very difficult for there to be human productivity because the body is unable to cool itself when it's hot and humid. And so compelled or forced labor seems to replace other sorts of arrangements, at least when we're talking about the tropics. This next slide talks about the nature of the triangular trade that took place between Europe, Africa, and the New World. And it's just a new form of global trade. Now, there was already global trade taking place, via the Silk Road. And then when the Portuguese find the all-water route to India, of course, that's a form of global trade. But going west, it continues to grow, and the contact between Europe, Africa, and the Americas continues and grows. So that's really what the triangular trade system is. The trade networks, the various trade networks that existed between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. There is variance. There is a variety of different destination points as far as trade goes. Sometimes it could be between Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean, for example. Sometimes Africa may be completely omitted. It could be trade between Europe, the Caribbean, and North America. It just depended. But that's the one thing, though, and I'll move this so you can see. When discussing Africa, the slaves were rather the commodity, the trade good that was exported. Okay, unfortunately, they were treated as if they were just simply another trade good, and we'll see evidence of the effects that kind of misconception had. So when we talk about the slave trade in its entirety, beginning in 1518, we start to see, and I'm talking about the transatlantic slave trade, all the way. So from 1518 until the slave trade ceased in the mid 1800s. We see somewhere in the neighborhood of about 12 million African slaves transported across the Atlantic, okay? It looks, based on this map, about 5 million reach Brazil, another 4.5 million to what is called the West Indies, but we more readily refer to that as the Caribbean. And then when we look at the 13 American colonies, it's just about 500,000, 500,000. So as I said, I want to talk more in depth about the treatment of the African slaves, especially their journey over, which is referred to as the Middle Passage. Okay, so that's what was taking place aboard ships. Okay. Prior to that, there was the enslavement by African slaves on the western coast or in the interior of Africa. And as time went on, the location of the slave traders went increasingly further and further inland, and they stripped the continent of some of its fittest members. And here we see some African villagers who have been enslaved, and they are being forcibly marched to the coast by their African slave raiders. At any rate, upon their arrival, they would be sold to the Europeans. So these are the European slave, owners who would purchase them and then ship them across and then sell them to whomever wanted to buy them once they arrived in the Americas. So when we talk about the journey over the Middle Passage, because of the incredibly cramped and unsanitary and really just inhumane conditions, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 to 15% aboard a typical slave ship died. So we're looking at around 400 to 450 people would be stowed in the cargo hold, and there they spent about 16 hours a day. About 8 hours of their day would be on the deck of the ship. When they were stowed below, they were segregated by sex and by age. So the men were chained. They were shackled and chained while they were under the ship in the cargo hold, whereas the women and the children were not, but they were kept separate from the men. And so that is where sort of the major problem with the sanitation took place, because there were no facilities for them to relieve themselves. And so the men, because they were shackled in place, they would have to relieve themselves where they were. and because of the lack of clean air, or fresh air, and frequent, cleanings of these areas, which didn't take place, disease became a problem. And so that was what typically was responsible for so many people dying. And let's see, just to kind of close this discussion out and put kind of a bookend on it, I want to just talk about the end of the slave trade, when that took place. It remained fairly acceptable by Europeans for the most part, because they viewed blacks as inferior. Unfortunately, that is a painful reality. But there was a growing number of people, especially in England, who opposed it. And so they're going to be called abolitionists, because they called for the abolition of the slave trade. And so it was the work really of the Society of Friends, better known as Quakers here in the United States, who really criticized it along moral and religious grounds. And so because of that, the sentiment, or the anti-slavery sentiment, began to spread. And so Great Britain becomes the first country in 1807 to permanently ban the slave trade. And oddly enough, the next year in 1808, the United States followed suit, although they did not ban slavery, of course, until after the Civil War, or at least in the last year of it. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you guys next time. Thank you.